Buddy, again, thank you for coming. I thought it was probably appropriate to try to explain to everybody why you actually came. Because I think that's probably been a big question in a lot of people's minds. So what I'd like to do is just spend 10 or 15 minutes just sort of explaining sort of the vision of the society, why we're here, why any of us are here. And I promise you there's not going to be a lot of data in this, because I know you're data out. I mean, we've had 8 hours of data, so hopefully there's not a lot of data. So anyway, the question is, why are we here? And anytime we seemingly have a question, at least nowadays, it didn't happen 15 years ago, but nowadays, if you have a question, any question whatsoever, it seems to me like there's a survey monkey for it, right? I mean, just even with this, I don't know about you, but I've received like probably 8 emails asking me to fill out a survey monkey about something to do with the AFS or the foregut. And so we sent out a survey monkey to find out why you guys decided to come, which obviously is probably the most reliable measure of things. Now, one of the answers was they wanted to see the results of Steve Leeds' survey monkey that he had sent out. So I'm happy to report that that will be coming a little bit later. A lot of you said it was just, I need CME, man. That's really the only reason I'm here. A lot of people, well, this was my response, it was Vegas. Apparently you get a hall pass by coming here, so I figured, what the hell. And then the vast majority, over 80% of you said, I don't really have any idea why I'm here. I was told to come, I came, I followed instructions, I'm here. And so, based on that last response, I thought it was important that we went over sort of what we thought the vision of this was and why it made sense for people to come. And so to understand that, you've got to understand a little bit where it all started. You know, there wasn't anything scientific about this. It started about a year ago, and it started with just a couple of observations. And a number of us got together, and it was a pretty motley crew of people. I mean, here's one of the pictures from one of the very first meetings. I mean, it's Reg Bell, Kate, Trip Buckley, Mike Smith, somebody else, Dan Lister, and John Pandolfino. I don't know if you can see it real well, but that's Blair Jobe in the bottom picture there. He was on a mission from God, apparently, to Alaska to do fishing or something. So he couldn't be in person, but he was there on the phone. And the observation that all of us had were very similar. There were a lot of similarities between what we had all observed. One of which was this: it became apparent that there was really no specific training path to get to foregut. And the reason that was important is because the group of us felt like what we were doing was a little bit diluted by Tom, Dick, and Harry. Now, I'm not sure you're familiar with Tom, Dick, and Harry, but Tom, Dick, and Harry is really anybody out there that wanted to do a Nissen fund application. And we were big believers in the Nissen fund application, but the reputation of the Nissen has just been skewered. And it was skewered because the procedure was sort of opened up to anybody that wanted to do it. And so when Tom, Dick, and Harry did it, the outcomes were a lot different than the group of us did it. But nevertheless, we got sort of blamed for Tom, Dick, and Harry. Now, the other thing we observed was that John Pandolfino actually had a Lamborghini. Now, why that was important is because John suddenly had to leave the meeting on a Tuesday afternoon to get the oil changed in his Lamborghini. And I said to him, John, I've got a Ford F-150. Why don't I just take it down to Jiffy Lube? They're open on Sundays. You know, you go in there 15 minutes, you got your oil changed. He's, I'm not taking my Lamborghini down to Jiffy Lube. That doesn't make any sense. Why would I take that, my nice expensive car, down to Jiffy Lube? And so that moment in time, I learned 2 things. The first and foremost was that Northwestern pays a lot better than USC. And so that helped me a little bit with negotiations at USC, but not much. The second thing I learned is, for me, my esophagus was worth quite a bit, I thought. It may not be worth much to you guys, but to me, my esophagus was worth a lot. And by God, why the hell was I going to take my esophagus down to Jiffy Lube? I wasn't going to do that. I'm going to take it to the guy that specializes in esophagus. And so I didn't really understand why you have a really expensive car and you're going to take it to somebody that only deals with that type of car. But somehow, if you've got a problem with your esophagus, any Tom, Dick, and Harry can take care of your problem. So it didn't make a lot of sense. The other thing we realized pretty quickly was, more and more it felt like the current societies have gone too broad. We were spending $3,000 to go to a society meeting for 4 days to hear four talks on foregut. That was it. And it was like, why are we here? More and more, we weren't getting out of it what we had thought we were supposed to. The other factor was it was usually the same talks we already heard. It was usually the same talks by the same guys that gave the talk the year before. So again, we weren't getting the bang for our buck that we thought. The other thing was a little weird is, we've got at a minimum, six different recommendations on how to treat this disease, one disease. Whether we're talking GERD or Barrett's or motility disorder, somehow we've got 6 or 7 or 8 different recommendations by 3 GI societies, 3 surgical societies. There was no consensus. And so at the end of the day, it was very apparent that foregut didn't have a home. It didn't have a home anywhere. It was sort of the red-headed stepchild of all of this. And so despite being an orphan disease, so to speak, there was a lot of people that wanted a piece of the pie. And what I mean by that is everybody wanted a piece of the pie. Gastroenterology had a piece of the pie. General surgery had a piece of the pie. Bariatrics has gotten into the game. They wanted a piece of the pie. Thoracic surgery wanted a piece of the pie. Surgical oncology said they owned that piece of the pie. And there was a crap load of societies that owned a piece of the pie. From SAGES to ACS to SSAT to ASGE, AGA, ACG, ATS. There's a lot of letters here. ASMBS, SSO, ANMS. My God, it went on forever. But nobody seemingly wanted the whole pie. Nobody took ownership of this. And the other factor here was there was really no specific qualifications needed to do foregut. It didn't matter which one of these pathways you came down, you were able to do foregut. No questions asked. And so that whole idea of no qualifications needed, you know what that translates into? Well, it translates into this. Anyone can do it. It's simple. Foregut must be simple if everybody can do it. You've got 18 different pathways you can get to foregut. Everybody can do it. Well, I will argue that foregut is not simple. It's not simple at all. In fact, I think it's a hell of a lot more difficult than colorectal. It's a lot more difficult than bariatrics. I would argue that it's more difficult than hepatobiliary vascular. It's certainly more difficult than hernia surgery. And for God's sakes, it's got to be more difficult than breast. Jesus, there's only 2 of them and there's only one problem you can have. But somehow all of these have become specialties. All of these are societies. All of these actually have fellowship programs associated with them. But somehow foregut was left out of this. But I will argue that foregut is not only complex, but it's unique. And it's unique in that it requires a multidisciplinary approach. Because in order to do foregut, you just can't simply be a gastroenterologist. You can't simply be a surgeon or a technician. you've got to own the whole disease. And to own the whole disease, somebody within your group, whether it's you or your gastroenterologist, has got to be able to do endoscopy with all the tools and tricks of the trade that we have. Somebody's got to be able to do pH monitoring so we make sure that the patient has reflux. Somebody's got to be able to do manometry, as we've heard all day today. You got to rule out that the patient's got achalasia. Somebody's got to be able to do EMR to remove the nodule. Somebody's got to be able to ablate Barrett's, and somebody's got to be able to do something interventional, whether it's surgical or gastroenterology, to treat the disease. This is the only way you can actually be a center of excellence for the treatment of foregut, and that's kind of what we're pushing here. The other thing that we observed was what I will call the foregut convergence. And it's this idea that the lines are sort of blurring between gastroenterologists and surgeons. You know, in the old days, it was they had their endoscopic tower and we had our knife. That was it. There was a clear separation between these two groups. But over these last 10 to 15 years, those two places have converged. And they've converged into this weird endoscopic monster called endoscopic surgery. And I can tell you this right now, when I was training, everything on this list was done surgically. But now it's not. Things have changed. We don't remove the esophagus for high-grade dysplasia anymore. We don't remove it for early cancer. Achalasia is now, as you heard from Lee, it's being treated endoscopically, POEM. Pyloromyotomy for gastroparesis being treated endoscopically. TIF, Stretta, Muse, bariatrics is starting to go endoscopic. Cricomyotomy, full thickness tumor resections are being done endoscopically. And as you heard from Santiago Horgan, this is going to get even more advanced with some of these robotic endoscopic platforms. And so the question is, who's holding the endoscope? I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I'm not sure I really care what the answer is. But it's endoscopic surgery, and the two have sort of converged. And so the question is, does any of it matter? Does any of this matter? Maybe the outcomes are similar. Maybe we were wrong. The outcomes are similar if Tom, Dick, and Harry do this. Well, you saw some of this data earlier, and I think it was from Brandt who showed a bit of this, but this is a publication by Marco Patti, and I promised you not to show a lot of data, so I'll jump right through this, but he looked at the outcomes of anti-reflux surgery here in the United States, depending on the volume of the procedures done at your particular hospital. And what he found was pretty simple. If you were at a low or intermediate volume hospital, your complication rates were higher. Across the board, everything from esophageal perforation to bleeding to cardiac failure, respiratory failure, and all complications in general. He also found length of stay was longer and cost was higher at the places that didn't do a lot of this. And the pushback that I usually get when I give this talk is, well, you know, everybody has complications, there's a learning curve, but at least they didn't die, right? That would be worse. Well, I agree with that. Death would be worse. Death is always worse than a complication. But Ninh Nguyen published this already. This is already out there. He looked at the mortality rate associated with anti-reflux surgery here in the United States and found very clearly that the mortality rate was double when this procedure was done at hospitals that didn't do a lot of it. He went on further to find that the mortality rate actually decreased for every 10 cases per year that hospital did. And it's not just hospital volume. It's surgeon volume, obviously. This is a publication by C. Dan Smith and Stephen Bowers who looked at the recurrence rate of hiatal hernia repair, paraesophageal hernia repair. Almost 600 cases. And lo and behold, what they found was quite shocking. The 6-month recurrence rate was 34%. I mean, that's flipping huge. It doesn't get any worse than 34% at 6 months. Why did you even do the operation? But lo and behold, it can get worse. The recurrence rate was 54% if you did less than 10 of these per year. I mean, why are you even doing it if half the time what you're doing is failing? They did a multivariate analysis and found that really the only factor that predicted success, failure, or recurrence was surgeon experience. Now, this just doesn't apply to GI or to surgeons. This applies to GIs also. Like it or not, this is coming down your pipeline. It's already been shown in Barrett's that the ability to eradicate Barrett's is much higher in GIs that do a lot of this. And I can tell you this right now, the problem is going to be further accentuated by this convergence of GI and surgery. I can tell you this right now. Later tonight, when I'm regurgitating the beer and the fish tacos that I had, I'm going to go to Ken Chang to get my TIF. I'm not going to Joe the generalist GI. That ain't going to happen. The other thing I will tell you right now is poems should not be performed by Tom, Dick, and Harry. Because remember, these are the same three guys that screwed up the reputation of the Nissen. Period. We've got to police this, both surgery and GI, or it's going to go the same way as the Nissen. This is an interesting presentation and now publication that was at the European Surgical that looked at this very question. Is it time for centralization of care? Centralization of care, and they looked at all specialties, hepatobiliary, colorectal, but they specifically looked at foregut. And they found with foregut that indeed surgeon and GI volume was important. Hospital volume was important. Multidisciplinary approach was incredibly important. And at the end of the day, if you positioned yourself as a multidisciplinary foregut center, your cost was lower, your complication rate was less, your mortality rate was less, and your outcomes were better. They listed a series of 12 things that they thought were important with all of this, which I list here, but I will point out that really what was important here is that you define the problem based on the organ system or the disease. That you have the infrastructure, that you have a fully functioning multidisciplinary team to treat whatever disease you're talking about. So again, the world has changed. The idea of a generalist for many of these diseases has sort of passed. And so to answer the question why we were here, I mean, to kind of put down some of the grumblings I've heard for the last year about why we are here, I will tell you that why we are here is not to just put on another meeting. That isn't the purpose of this. It's not to form another journal. It's not to compete with other societies. That's not what we're intending to do here. I will tell you that there is no other society to compete with. There's no society that focuses solely on foregut. There is no society that provides a multidisciplinary approach to foregut. The reason we're here is to distinguish foregut as a multidisciplinary specialty. And the purpose of positioning this as a multidisciplinary specialty is to give foregut a home. And by giving it a home, you can provide the focused educational forum that it needs. You can develop training pathways for the treatment of foregut disease, both from GI and general and thoracic and everybody else that has a piece of that pie. You can provide professional standards to determine who should be doing foregut. You can develop benchmarks of excellence. You can develop collaborative treatment guidelines. Because again, guys, you heard it today, this is the era of personalized medicine. You don't treat everybody the same. Even within GERD, as you heard today, it's a spectrum of disease. And we need to treat patients as individuals. GERD is not one disease. And so what we need to stop is this. We need to stop the idea is you go to a barber and you get a haircut. Because that is, to me, it's haircut malpractice is really what it is. Patients should be treated as individuals and not as a group. And so why we are here? To me, the answer is simple. The answer is simple. The reason we are here is to improve the care of patients with foregut disease through collaborative specialization, period. That's it. It's as simple as that. And so again, I want to thank you for coming. Now we're going to hear a little bit from Reg Bell, who's going to sort of introduce sort of the board behind all this. But again, it's to improve the care of foregut patients. It's as simple as that. Thank you.